It's the J.R. Joker Show with our featured performer, J.R. Joker. Not appearing on tonight's show, Ernest Borgnine, Elizabeth Taylor, Judy Garland, and Adam West, all owing to the fact that they're not alive anymore. But we do have one slightly living person, the featured performer of our show, and here he is, J.R. Hey, everybody. I hope you're as glad to see me as I am to see you. So what we work in here is words, and I like to be economical with words. I know I run off at the mouth, but I try to vary my vocabulary. And that was vary, V-A-R-Y, vary my vocabulary. And I try to avoid using V-E-R-Y. Vary is like a really overused word that emasculates real adjectives. Like, what's the difference between good looking and being very good looking? I mean, when do you hit the very plateau? Tevye sings, "If I were a rich man." He doesn't sing, "If I were a very rich man." When does rich become very rich? I mean, hello, Mr. Johnson. This is Bob down at the bank. We were looking at your accounts, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Mr. Johnson, but you're merely rich now. I'd be satisfied to be rich. I mean, what's the definition of very rich? So, I mean, unless you're talking about Einstein or Bill Gates or Hercules, let's lay off very. Let's also lay off awesome. That used to mean something one time. The ocean, the Sistine Chapel, Mount Everest, Beethoven, Django Reinhardt, God. These are awesome things, awesome beings. People nowadays are like, "Oh, what do you like? Ketchup or mustard?" "Well, I prefer ketchup." Awesome. "What's your favorite color?" "Light blue." Awesome. And the book's awesome, the movie's awesome, the ketchup is awesome, everything is awesome. Just overused. So let's try not to use very so much and have some respect for our language. Adjectives do have meaning after all. Another thing that people do is the like thing. Instead of he said, like, she's all like, "Oh, he likes Bob," and he's all like, "Oh, I don't care if she likes me or not," and he's all like, "Well, I think you should care," and this could eventually contaminate our literature. So it's like, so God is all like, "Let there be light," and he's all like, "And it is good," and then it's all like on the first day, and God is all like, well, you see where that's going. Anyway, so let's nip that one in the bud. Very, awesome, and like. Three words that we want to be careful of using. So people have written in and said, like, "JR, why don't you play more banjo?" And I might a little later. I'll go get it and just show it to you right now. This is indeed a banjo, one of the few instruments you could use to threaten people with. He's really going to play it. Just do as he says. I mean, he is really going to play it. We're not kidding. So maybe I'll just tell you about it instead of actually play it, right? And so this banjo's been in my family for like a long, long time. My grandfather owned this banjo when I was a little JR, little kid. I used to listen to him play and sit down on the porch on his rocking chair, and he'd play. And his son, my father, didn't have any interest in it at all. Kind of skipped a generation. Unlike the male pattern baldness in my family, didn't skip this generation right here. I'm like, I get all emotional about how I acquired this banjo. Um, we all knew that Grandpa was going, and not much time left. And I hope I don't get choked up when I tell you this. He calls me into his room, and he just me and him. And he's lying on his bed, and banjo is leaning up against the nightstand there, and he sold me the banjo right then and there. Yeah. And my family was like really upset with me because I gave Grandpa a post-dated check, that I don't know, but they were upset with me. So I don't know. Am I going to play anything for you? No, I don't think I will. So there. Yeah, what the heck? Okay. Let's see. I played the Pachelbel Canon the last time. Oh yeah, I'll play something simple. Now, maybe you didn't think that that was much, and it wasn't, but I have to tell you something. I played that whole thing standing on one foot. Excuse me. Hi. Hi, how you doing? Hi. Okay, so a little music there. So anyway, that's how I came to acquire that. And it's been my back door into show business. Ha 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 ha. Show business. Um, People think sometimes when they hear me tell a joke or two, and that I play the banjo, a lot of people think I'm copying Steve Martin. And I am not, actually. And you should probably know, and if Steve ever hears this, the odds are only about 1,000,000,000,000 to 1. Steve didn't invent banjo with comedy either. As a matter of fact, banjo playing in comedy has kind of been tied for a pretty long time. The Minstrel Show, which they started about 16 years even before the Civil War started. It's antebellum. Um, White guys kind of like co-opted the banjo. There's this fellow in 1854 named Joel Walker Sweeney. He seems to get the credit for kind of like giving us the banjo that we know now, which is based on an earlier, more cruder kind of a gourd with a stick and a string or something like that from Africa. And it just got popular and spread all over his neighborhood and eventually the world. And so they had these minstrel shows, which if you don't know what that is, it's just white guys in blackface. They paint their face black, and they're like imitating the happy-go-lucky Negroes. And they would also play tambourines and banjos, and probably other instruments too. But anyway, and they would put on shows and tour on riverboats a lot, and they'd come to a landing, a dock, along the Mississippi River or the Natchez River or whatever river, and put on shows and earn their livelihood that way, their way. And that was pretty popular. And they would tell lots of jokes. So banjos were like, were like accompaniment for the jokes half the time. And that went on for a pretty long time. Even in the Grand Ole Opry, for years and years, there would be guys who would play the banjo, and competently, even well, and tell jokes. a guy named String Bean was one fellow, Uncle Dave Macon, Grandpa Jones, who had such a long career. He was even on Hee Haw. And we would see, Roy Clark and other people like that. Even if they played really well, and Roy Clark really could play lots of string instruments really well, chordophones, but he would tell jokes with the banjo. He would. I think it wasn't until Earl Scruggs came along when all of a sudden, you could get serious about your playing. Earl Scruggs, of course, is the most widely copied musician ever, certainly of the 20th century. Because of him, just like oodles and oodles of people all around the world play the banjo, especially the style that he invented, which is now known as Scruggs. Okay, so when he was first on the Grand Ole Opry, people drove off the road listening to this on the radio. They just couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was so exciting, this new kind of music, bluegrass banjo. And but one guy commented like, well, he plays really well, but he's not very funny. People actually expected him to be funny because he was playing the banjo, but Earl Scruggs just, was serious about his music. And then other musicians came in his wake and followed his example, but also extended, amplified, broadened the kind of music they played on the banjo, which is also classical or Indian music, of course, folk music, and jazz. What else is there? Gospel. Whatever. Anyway, rock and roll. Led Zeppelin plays banjo. Fleetwood Mac. A lot of people play the banjo. Anywho, that's about it with the banjo. So a little bit about show business. So I'm backing into this with a few jokes and a few strings on my banjo. And I want to tell you how contagious folk music is with a true story. With a true story. I tell these true stories now and again, and I'll tell one now. This happened to me in Colombia, South America. Colombia is a country that is designed by Federico Fellini and Salvador Dali, and it's completely surreal. I mean, just what goes on down there. If you ever read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you'll understand about the magic fantasy that goes on there. So I was driving around the middle of the country one time with some friends from the State Department. This is, I don't know, 4 hours outside of Bogota, and we kind of got into like a minor accident. We didn't mean to, but this guy was running across the road, and he didn't see us. We were in a red Volkswagen going pretty fast. There's no posted speed limit. There's no traffic. There's no highway patrol or anything like that. And we didn't actually hit him. He hit us. I know this sounds crazy, but like our car is going like this. He just runs into the side of us. He didn't even see it. He literally didn't see us. He was looking at something else. He was distracted by something. If I recall, he was waving at something or somebody. And the guy spun around like a character in a cartoon. What? And he fell down. I thought we killed the guy, We roared to a stop, got out. And the guy just was standing up, dusting himself off. He really seemed to be okay. It's unbelievable. He exchanged a few words, not of anger, with my friend Steve, who was driving. And Steve gave him 10 pesos. Nowadays, 10 pesos, no one would blow their nose with it. But back then, 10 pesos was like 50 cents. But I mean, it was like a full day's wages for somebody there. So he just accepted it. So we get back in the car and we're proceeding on our way. And after about 10 minutes, we come to a glorieta, a circle in the road. Blocking our way onto that glorieta, and then hopefully to proceed some more, was a carabinieri. A carabinieri is like a Colombian cross between a soldier and a policeman. He's like a country policeman, but they wear like fatigues, and they carry carbines, whatever they're called, and so they're known as carabineros. So, and he's stopping us, and then we see him talking on a walkie-talkie. This is years before cell phones, but there were walkie-talkies since World War II. and he's saying, and I could understand Spanish, so he's saying, yes, yes, it's the gringos with the red Volkswagen. So he basically he takes us into the fortress, of what they call the Batallon, which is again another cross between a military installation and a jail, and he takes us in to see El Capitan. So, by the way, I'm also holding. Um, for people who don't understand, I will define the word holding. It means there's some marijuana on my person. Now, at this time, marijuana was still considered pretty taboo, even for Colombians. Even Colombians who dealt pot thought it was low class to smoke it. So, I mean, like, well, the police at that time, wouldn't have been a good idea to catch me. I mean, at this time, I have long hair, I have a beard, and wearing tie-dye, my usual hippie regalia. And so, but I'm with Steve and his wife, who have diplomatic immunity. They have diplomatic passports. Okay, so they show us into El Capitan, and he's trying to rip us a new one, and he's calling us everything but white men, and blah blah blah. And then he says what all authorities in Colombia always say: papeles. Let me see your papers. So Steve and Barbara show him their diplomatic passports, and I think, you can kill somebody and walk with a diplomatic passport. But country Capitan here doesn't really understand what that is. They're just passports to him. He doesn't understand, he just doesn't. So it doesn't faze him at all. And now he has to see my passport, the hippie, the long-haired, bearded, granny glass wearing hippie. And they haven't discovered that I'm holding. Back in the car, there's also more dope and paraphernalia and stuff like that. Just smoking dope, no cocaine or anything like that. Now, unlike Steve and Barbara, I was a single guy. I was pretty young. I was in my early 20s, and so my passport, my Americano passport, just had my parents' address. I didn't have my own home, actually, not yet, Now, my parents lived and grew old and passed away in a city in southern Florida called Hollywood. Its real full name is Hollywood by the Sea, in case you care. Anyway, Hollywood. It was founded by this guy, I think his name is Lester or Chester, something like that, Young, with the great hopes that they, in Florida, like California, would also make movies. It's not like a coincidence it's called Hollywood, by the way. And it almost works. So far, I've been keeping a roster. I have my clipboard somewhere, but I think I remember the cipher. They've made, so far in Hollywood, Florida, they've made almost one movie. Thank you, drummer. Anyway, that's my passport says. I lived on Van Buren Street in Hollywood, Florida. Well, the captain, he doesn't know the difference in Florida and California. He probably couldn't even name two states. When El Capitan saw the word Hollywood, and this shows you the power of show business and the spell that everybody is under with this, he leaped to his feet. He had somebody from Hollywood right in front of him. He offered me his chair behind the desk. He clapped his hands and he called for cigarettes and Coca-Cola for his guests. And I took total advantage. I wasn't going to give him a geography lesson and tell him, oh no, it's just Hollywood, Florida, where they play golf, and there ain't no movie stars there. Oh, hell no. Hand to God, I told him John Wayne was my neighbor. I told him that. Oh, he was just delighted. Just delighted. And he spent the next hour, at least, regaling us with his tales of his cross with show business. It turns out that they made a spaghetti western in Colombia, and he was in charge of security. Made sure no one would steal a horse or something like that. and even, you know, spoke to the stars, two Italian fellas. If you know the series, there's a series of movies about Trinity. They call me Trinity. Now I'm Trinity. You're not Trinity. I'm Trinity. I am, but you're not. And with these two Italian guys, Bud Spencer and Terence Hill, whose real names are unpronounceable. I don't even know what they are. And they just dub in their, you know, languages for wherever they are. They might phonetically speak it. And the guy Terence Hill, he looks more like an American than any American you ever saw. He's like the blonde, blue-eyed guys from northern Italy that Dennis Hopper describes in the Sicilian scene in True Romance. He's telling me, you know, he met them, and because I am a movie buff and a trivia guy, I actually was able to name those two guys when he told me about he made the Trinity movies, and that just like, if it wasn't already cemented, it was like now cemented that standing before him is like a official representative of Hollywood America. So he told us all about it, and then he let us go. He never mentioned the guy with the accident on the road or anything like that at all. We just figure when this poor guy stood up and, you know, took the 10 pesos, all his buddies said, well, what happened? What do you mean, those gringos just drove off? Well, they gave me 10 pesos. 10 pesos? Those are gringos. She got 1,000 pesos. So they probably have a phone in that little, not a town, a hamlet, less than a hamlet, a shtetl, a collection of houses along the road. You know, that's all. There's not even like another road back. No, that's just a few houses along the road. It's the whole municipality. But there must have been a phone in there because they called the Batallon and they told them that, you know, John Dillinger and his gang, you know, are headed your way. Stop them, you know. They just cold-bloodedly and deliberately ran my friend over. I don't know what they told him. But anyway, the Capitan didn't mention, let us go. He was delighted, and he's going to go home tonight and tell his pobre esposa, his poor wife, that he met a guy from Hollywood, blah, 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 blah. When we got back to our car, we saw that the lower echelon cops had found our dope and the pipe and everything, and they moved it around just to show that they were not as big schmucks like the Capitan. Oh, so that's my true story, and I always like to end with a true story, so hang in there, and we'll see you real soon. This is the J.R. Joker Show.